and then you can start.
Just one moment, please. Okay, we are live.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AIB board meeting. I want to welcome our members and all the others who've joined us for this session. Our chair, Ike Leggett, had a last-minute conflict and can't be here at the start of the meeting, but he's a little later. I want to offer a very special welcome to our guest for this meeting, Andreas Schlechter, who I will introduce properly in just a few moments. But first, let me say that this is a very important session for us because today we are launching the effort to develop our strategic implementation plan for the Blueprint Bill. Over the next several months, we're going to be taking deep dives into the 5 pillars of the Blueprint Bill and laying out in specific terms our expectations for what all entities involved in the implementation of the Blueprint will be required to do, including timelines for the completion of their work. To begin this process, we want to step back and reflect on the goals and expectations of the Blueprint, which are of course based on the recommendations of the Commission for Innovation and Excellence in Education that I had the privilege of chairing. At the end of the day, and at the end of the implementation, what is it we are trying to achieve? The charge to the Commission was to make recommendations so that Maryland's pre-K to 12 school system would provide children with an education of the quality of the best performing school systems in the world. And the Commission's aspirations and recommendations are now embedded in the Blueprint Bill. We have to keep this goal at the front of our mindset as we go forward. We want to learn from best practices of other states, but our goal is not to have a system as good as North Carolina or Virginia or California. It's to be as good as the best in the world. As the Commission learned, sadly, the hard reality is that we are far, far from this aspiration, and so there is much difficult work to be done. Presently, based on the National Assessment of Student Progress Scores, or NAEP scores, Maryland's 4th and 8th grade scores in reading and math are very much in the middle of the pack nationally, down around 24, 25, 26 in comparison to the other 50 states. That would be bad enough if America's pre-K to 12 schools were top performing internationally, but they're not. Sadly, based on the Program for International Student Assessment, or better known as the PISA test, US students are very much in the middle of the pack in relation to other countries with advanced economies. So Maryland students are in the middle of the pack in the US, and the US is in the middle of the pack internationally, and we're supposed to be as good as the best. Moreover, Maryland has severe issues in equitable school funding based on race and income, and we have large achievement gaps. So clearly, we have a long way to go to achieve the aspirations and expectations set forth by the Commission and embedded in the Blueprint Bill. But it can be done. That's what we have to keep focused on. It can be done. The Blueprint lays out the roadmap to get us there. And it's the AIB's responsibility to ensure all parties involved in the Blueprint implementation do their part to follow this roadmap and get us there. This brings us to our guest speaker for today, Andreas Schlechter. Andreas is the Director for Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or better known as OECD, based in Paris. He has spent the last 2 decades studying in great detail the jurisdictions that participate in PISA to learn what works, in what context, and for which students. A big focus of his work is on equity. Equity, as you know, is a major element of the Commission's report and the resulting blueprint law. We made recommendations on equitable funding formulas, and we also spent much of our time trying to understand what it would take to deliver high and more equitable student outcomes to all, no matter what their zip code. We are extremely pleased to have Andreas with us today. As the AIB kicks off its work in developing a comprehensive plan for blueprint implementation this summer, we are eager to hear his key takeaways around effective education practices from top performers. After Andreas's presentation, and incidentally, he's beamed into us all the way from Paris, he has graciously agreed to engage in a conversation. So Andreas, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Britt. It's a pleasure to join you here, and congratulations to the Blueprint Bill. And the reason I say this is that it is actually quite well aligned with what you see in countries that have made significant progress. But, let me just share a few slides to just give you a broad sense. And unfortunately, I must tell you, I can't say very much about the position of Maryland internationally because different from Massachusetts or Florida or Connecticut, Maryland has not yet participated as a state in the OECD international benchmark. So
I think we're going to change that though, Andreas.
Yeah.
That's something that was in the Commission's recommendation, I believe is in the blueprint law.
Yeah, you should. I think it's going to always give you an outside kind of perspective. And
well, given our aspirations, we have to do this. I mean, how else will we know if we're really making the progress we aspire to achieve?
Now, if you look here, for example, you compare, the development of the world, just think about, technological developments over the last 2 decades. And if you look at the performance in digital literacy, reading literacy of students, 15-year-olds in the United States, it's actually been fairly constant. There's been a little bit of, up and down, but as you can see here on the chart, not something in that is really transformational. And this is actually the best performance domain of American students. If I would show you the results for mathematics, they would not even be in the average of the OECD. They would be quite clearly below that. So that is sort of the picture of the last 2 decades. And just give you sort of one number. When we ask, who of the 15-year-olds in the United States can distinguish fact from opinion. That's in the 21st century, the essence of literacy. It's no longer just about extracting knowledge. It's about, constructing, validating, triangulating knowledge. And you can see it's just about 14% of 15-year-olds are really good at that when the context get complicated. And we didn't have actually that complicated context. It's what, what you would find on Facebook or, the internet anyway. It's better than it was in 2000, the year 2000, where this was just 10%. But once again, we live in a very, very different world. So what you can clearly see is technology has evolved a lot faster than the capacity of students in this. But, that's the overall picture. But you can see actually some countries that have seen just dramatic progress on this, While, much of the world was sleeping, the Chinese regions that we have in our international assessments have moved to the top, and actually very rapidly. You can see Singapore, they've always been doing really well. They keep getting better. That's also important that, high-performing systems are not standing still. Estonia, one of the poorest countries in Europe, a big performer. Other countries in Europe, you look here at Portugal, you look at Poland. Now they have, despite really difficult circumstances, caught up with the United States. In the year 2000, probably very few would have predicted that. At the bottom of the scale, you can see countries like Peru or Albania making significant progress. Countries like Brazil, not very fast, but moving forward, Turkey. And why I highlight these two countries is they're not only improving the quality of learning outcomes, the test scores, but they also have got a lot more people into the school system that used to be their problem. So I think that's really important. But I want to highlight one country in particular, because Brett, you said something, it is possible to turn things around. And a country that has been remarkable in this is Sweden. They used to be doing really, really well. And then, they slided in further and further down. But then in 2009, Sweden put together its blueprint bill and actually has been very rigorous in implementation. And what you can actually see, it didn't take them long to actually move rapidly forward with significant progress. And it didn't involve extra funding. Actually, it's very interesting. Sweden didn't increase investment in education. It changed the way it invested its existing resources. And it does really show us that you can turn things around. I think a very important kind of message. So yeah, there are many countries like the United States that haven't seen much progress, but there are others where you can actually see things keep moving. And that gets you to the list. One, thought we all have, well, performance is about money, but actually when you look at spending per student here on the horizontal axis and, the performance of countries, for low spending countries, money makes a difference. If you have very little money, yeah, spending more is a good thing to do. But when you are where the United States is, actually money is not the big differentiator. Now you can see, for example, Estonia or Poland or Singapore spending a lot less and actually achieving the same or better. So you cannot explain the performance results just with the amount of money that countries spend. It's really about how you spend the money. And the same story is true when you look at the volume of learning time. Here in blue, you see the number of hours that students study in school in different countries. And in yellow, the time they spend learning out of school, doing homework, private tutoring, lots of things. And you see huge differences across the world. United Arab Emirates, students spend, close to 60 hours learning per week. A huge investment in learning time. If you look to Finland, it's just, 37 hours. Huge differences in the volume of learning time. But when you look at productivity, learning gains per hour of instruction, you can see in Finland or Germany or Switzerland or Sweden or Estonia, students learn a lot in very little time, whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little. And what I wanted to show you here is that for the United States, the issue is not so much a lack of learning time. It is the below average productivity. It's the quality of the instructional environment that really is the big variable. So adding hours is not the key. It's basically doing things differently. So now you ask me, of course, what have countries done that have moved the needle? And I want to talk about, basically 5 parameters here. One is, it's about the what in education. In the past, you just teach students something. You teach subject matter content. Today, success is more about, complex ways of thinking, complex ways of working. To do well on the PISA test, it's not enough to remember what you learned in school. You have to be able to creatively use and apply that knowledge. And that in today's world is really what matters most. The world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Now, Google knows everything. It rewards you for what you can do with what you know. And I think that's a big transition in curriculum and instruction that high-performing education systems have seen. Easy to say, hard to do, because obviously that requires on, the instructional environment. The second point, and Britt, you made that already clear, is, in the past, it was enough for some people to be successful because your economy only needed a few well-educated people. Today, you need everybody. That's the second dimension, getting everybody to succeed and understanding that different students learn differently and embracing that diversity effectively. Second characteristic of high-performing systems. And then, of course, that depends very much on the capacity in the system. In the past, teaching was neither financially nor intellectually very attractive. It's basically about knowledge transmission. what you can see in high-performing education systems, you have a high-level professional knowledge set of workers. Now, people who are owners of their professional standards, who work with a fairly high degree of professional autonomy, but in the collaborative culture. So they know and own what they are doing and contribute to their own profession. Of course, those people don't like to work in a kind of very industrialized work organizations. No? They prefer flat, collegial, entrepreneurial kind of work environments. And that's what you see in high-performing education systems, no? Where the work organization is very much, giving teachers a lot of career differentiation, a lot of ways to advance, and a good recognition for what they contribute to professional knowledge. That was a bit fast. I'll, lead you through some of these points in a little bit more detail. How have systems moved from, just the reproduction of knowledge to the creation of knowledge? And when you look at curricula, the learning systems in high-performing systems, you can characterize them essentially by three, concepts. Rigor, that is cognitive demand. They're incredibly demanding on students. And we typically underestimate what students are capable of doing it. There's a lot of focus. Many education systems are kind of mile wide, inch deep. We teach a lot of things at very shallow depths. And I would say that is also a bit the picture that the PISA data tell about the United States. Students are usually good at the first layer of the problem, but when they have to, show deep conceptual understanding, that's where they struggle. And the last part is about, the second part is really about teaching fewer things at greater depths. And the last part is about coherence, modeling learning. Much of our learning systems today is basically an artifact of historical decisions. Layers and layers of decisions got put on top, and that's what students learn. It's not really designed around, what learning science tells us and so on. And that coherence is something, when you go to Singapore, for example, that's the first thing that you will see. Second part is, instructional systems that remain true to the disciplines. There's a strong focus on disciplinary learning, but always, embedded in interdisciplinary understanding. Students have to think across the boundaries of subject matter disciplines. You see a lot of cross-curricular learning and often, project-based environments for this. There's always focus on the transfer value. You learn something that you can use in another context, so fairly high level of conceptual understanding, abstraction in the learning. There is focus on authenticity and also actually the focus on the social emotional aspects. Some things are caught, not taught, the kind of behavioral aspect, and they in some education systems they're not quite expressly embedded. So that's the sort of secret of the first layer, the curriculum. When you study high-performing systems, you always come across those 5 points. Let me turn to the second, how do you advance from getting some people to succeed to leveraging the, the extraordinary talents of ordinary students? And I want to come back to the chart I showed you before. This is the kind of rank order of the education systems by PISA performance. And now, I picked the United States and I show you the gap between the students from the most disadvantaged and from the wealthiest background. And you can see basically they cover almost the world. Now you can see huge performance gap between students from wealthy background and students from poor backgrounds. Some say, well, that's not something that schools can easily address because that has to do, with families, with social service, with a lot of things that are going on around school. And sure, that is true. But if you take a country like Portugal in Europe, the students with the same social characteristics as the poorest one in the United States do a lot better. And if I take those students from the Chinese regions, the most disadvantaged students from those Chinese regions do as well as the average student, or better than the average student in the United States. And if I look at mathematics, they would do as well as the highest performing systems. And that really shows us that poverty need not be destiny. They're very, very good to attract the most talented teachers into the most challenging schools. They're always pairing high and low performing schools. If you're a high performing school, you're going to get more money, but you cannot invest that money in your own school. You can use that money only to support lower performing schools. There's a lot of emphasis to spread good practice in the system. Same at the teaching profession. They're all connected in a network, and you can post your lesson plans, projects, ideas on a kind of crowd curated platform. And the more other teachers will, download your lessons, criticize your lessons, improve your lessons, the more recognition you will get in the education systems. At the end of the school year, your school principal will not only ask you, what are the test scores of your students in your class? They will ask you, how do other people in the profession look at you? How many other people have used your own ideas, your own lessons? And what impact did you make on the profession? So there's a constant utilization of resources, and that is highly beneficial for the most disadvantaged students. They really thrive in those environments. That brings me to another topic that is quite important as well. Here you see the performance variation distinguished between what is happening between school, that's the yellow part. The longer the yellow bar, the more variability is there in school performance. The longer the gray bar, the more variability there is in student performance within schools. And you can see again a world of difference. In Finland, the closest school is always the best school. There's virtually no performance variability between schools. Whether you are in a rich neighborhood or in a poor neighborhood in the north or the south of the country, doesn't matter. The schooling results are basically the same. The worst performer on this is Israel. There is a huge amount of performance variation between schools, between school systems, and so on. When you look at the United States, what's very interesting is that you might expect that it's all about school performance, but actually in the United States, most performance variation lies within schools. So it is not just about, finding a few dropout factories and fixing that. No, actually, the underperformance is about many students from many neighborhoods, from many schools. That's, I think, something that I'm not sure is obvious to everyone, that actually, the challenges often lie in many schools. It's not just, a few schools that are underperforming. And when you look to social segregation, you ask yourself where this comes from. And some people would say, oh, well, that's about public versus private schools or charter schools versus public schools and so on. Actually, when you look towards the United States, most social segregation is happening actually within the public school sector. So you do not address that by, making charter schools bigger or smaller, actually, or the sector smaller or bigger. It is actually a challenge for the public school system, the social segregation. That's where the tracking of students by background and so on plays in. So addressing this, I think it's going to be really, really important. So that's basically on the equity part. You can see also gender here. For example, when you look at career expectations among students who did very well in mathematics or science. What you can see, if you are a girl, you want to become you don't want to become the engineer. If you actually are a boy, that's your choice of occupation. So you can see that even though, you may have addressed the performance gap by gender, you can see when it comes to aspirations, there are important differences there. So that's really what I wanted to say on equity. And, you asked for the reasons, and this is really largely about resource allocation. What you can see here very clearly is, again, I can't say to what extent that is true for Maryland. This is just the average for the United States. But what it says here is that if you come from a disadvantaged background as a student, you are more likely to be put together with disadvantaged other students from other families, and you're going to more likely see the less qualified teacher and get the poorer educational resources. So you can clearly see, and that's true for many other education systems as well, that the school systems tends to reinforce and not moderate social disadvantage. And I know in the blueprint, you are addressing this with funding formulas. I really believe it's a very, very important instrument. You need to ensure that the funding schools get is proportional to the challenges they face. And that is, I think, a very, very important reversal to address this, and probably a good bet to see differences. Why do I say this? Because many education systems that have introduced these kinds of formula-based funding systems have really seen big changes and big improvements on the equity front. Now, talking a little bit about how do you get your teachers look more outward, how do you get your school system more dynamic? most people would say, well, the United States is a system of local control. Now, decisions are made very, very close to the front line. Well, that's not really what our data show. It's true that there's a lot of responsibility at the district level. But when you actually look at the school level, what is the share of decisions that are made in American schools? It's actually very low. If you are in the Netherlands, 9 out of 10 decisions are made at the school level. Who does the school hire? How do they work with their teachers? And so on, almost anything. Whereas in the United States, most decisions are made at the district level, here called local or upwards in the system. And you might say, well, that's also local, but actually from the school perspective, it often doesn't matter, whether decisions are made at a district level or at the state level or at the central level. What matters is the enabling environment at the school. And the reason I say this is when you actually look at the factors that influence performance, you can see the discretion at the school level, to some extent also at the teacher level, are the ones that are predictors of better outcomes. I don't know anything about the causal relationship here. That's a very, very difficult question. But when you look at, what predicts better outcomes, it's often that, very frontline enabling environment that gets teachers and schools to create the kind of environment, to configure space, time, people in a way that matters most for them. I have a lot more slides, but maybe this is a moment just to stop to see that we have enough time for our discussion.
Andres, thank you very, very much for those comments. Extremely helpful and informative for us. We appreciate the fact that you will engage us now in some discussion. One thing that I'll start and then turn to my colleagues to ask their own questions. But my lifelong career as a educator, both faculty member and administrator, and I firmly believe that the quality of the classroom instruction, the ability of the teacher, no matter what environment they're in, a gifted teacher can work wonders in educating students. And we have enormous teacher shortages here in the US. Moreover, when you look at teacher preparation programs, I happen to know University of Maryland College Park very well, those that choose to go into teaching tend to be students who have the lowest test scores on average. And so as a profession, despite the fact we have a number of superb teachers, as a profession, we're not attracting the volume of highly capable individuals into the teaching profession. And that's why the commission spent so much effort in trying to upgrade the status of teaching as a profession with better preparation, better certification requirements, better pay, et cetera, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about what happens in the high-performing systems? Are they able to attract adequate numbers of talented individuals, and how are they compensated? What is their status vis-a-vis others with comparable degrees of education?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And let me start with the easy part. The compensation matters, but doesn't explain as much as you might expect. Like in most education systems, teachers get better paid than in the United States. I think that is without a question. But when you look beyond sort of the basics, you have some countries that pay their teachers extremely well, like Luxembourg, where teacher quality is just so-so. And some countries, like Finland and Estonia, where teacher pay is actually quite low, where actually the most highly skilled people do want to become teachers. I think the easy part is to make teaching financially more attractive, and I think it's great that you look at that. The harder but more important part is to make teaching intellectually more attractive. And that has to do with career structures that you offer. That has to do with professional support that you offer. That has to do with the kind of work organization. You know, in the United States, there has been a drive to make classes smaller.
Right.
And what that has meant is that actually teachers have lost opportunities to do other things than teaching. Basically, the price for smaller classes has been a relatively high teaching load for teachers in the United States compared with other teachers. In many high-performing countries, classes would be larger, but teachers would have more time for other things than teaching. They would have more time to engage with students outside the classroom setting. You know, they do know their students. They know their life stories, their histories. As a teacher, you're not just, you know, an instructor. You're also a coach, a mentor, a facilitator. And that actually makes teaching more attractive.
Mm-hmm.
If you survey teachers, why did you become a teacher? The number one answer you get from people is because I want to make a difference to the lives of young people. And actually, we take that away from many teachers by having this very industrial environment where you teach 1 hour after the other. So I think creating an environment where teachers develop that sense of self-efficacy, where they see their students, it's one thing. The second part is in the United States, you rotate teachers often. You know, you don't stay with your students for a long time, really. But actually, if you want to see your students develop, that is very, very important. So you have many high-performing education systems where, as a teacher, you would be matched for a number of years to stay with the students. You see how they develop. You take personal responsibility. You know their parents, and so on. And again, that is something that we see as contributing to the attractiveness of
a teacher might teach third grade students, and then the next year teach them as fourth graders, and then
Absolutely.
as fifth. That's very interesting.
Absolutely. And that is precisely so that as a teacher, you take on responsibility for improvement rather than passing it on to the next teacher, which is sort of basically, you know, you're going to be stuck with that student. The next part I want to highlight, which is very closely related to the attractiveness of the profession, is the collaborative culture that you have in teaching. If you go to, you know, particularly the East Asian countries, Singapore, China, as a teacher, every week you see somebody else's lesson. Every week you engage in collaborative professional development. Every day, you know, you are engaged in analysis and design. You are not just an instructor of a prefabricated curriculum. You are a constant researcher and designer of innovative learning environments. And when you look at what these countries do on the technology front these days, I mean, it's just, you know, mind-blowing. And it's all done by teachers. It's not done by some tech company coming in. As a teacher, you have a real, and I think that's the part that is harder, but really more important than the financial part. The financing part, you can actually solve quite easily. You know, putting a greater premium on the teachers. The United States is the only country where, you know, less than half of spending actually arrives in the classroom. You know, that's not very good. You know, I think we can put a much higher fraction of money. But I think the intellectual part is really the part that drives ultimately the attractiveness.
And because the blueprint does reduce the amount of time teachers spend in front of, in order to build in more collaboration, it does put a premium on collaboration and research and investigation on teaching practices and curriculum. Well, let me turn to my colleagues and see if others have questions. I have some more, but I'm going to give them a chance. Who would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Britt.
Yeah.
This is Mara.
Please.
Yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity for this discussion. This is great. There was one thing, or there were many things said, but there was one thing that was said that stuck out with me as a lifelong educator, and that is that we underestimate what students can do. And when you said that, you know, everything just went off in me, and because I always say that students exceed our expectations, and I just wanted to make that point. But my question goes to talking about the United States and how the United States differs from other countries. And as you know, the United States is the great experiment, and we are very diverse. Racial composition, our immigrant status, socioeconomic status, and you touched on some things such as social segregation and poverty. But I just wonder, there's this argument out there that says because we're so diverse, that when we look at other nations, that what lessons were learned there are not applicable to what we do here in the United States. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
It depends with whom you compare yourself. If you make a comparison with Japan, I think what you say is absolutely true. Japan is a quite homogeneous country in many ways. For other countries, the United States is not exceptionally diverse. In Europe, you find a number of countries where you have as much ethnic, social, maybe not as much income variability. I think that's true that the United States is, but you would look to South American countries, they would be out, they would have much more uneven income distribution than the United States. So I actually would not take that sort of too far. I think the United States is a diverse country, but when you look at the share of students with an immigrant background, that's pretty much the norm now in most parts of the world, in most parts of the Western world. Now, when you look at the share of students with a kind of minority background, also there, Eastern Europe would actually have a lot more than the United States on this. So I think, it is a challenge of the system that not all countries have, but it is pretty normal. It is I think modern education systems can no longer, put their, focus on homogeneity. They need to find ways to address different needs of different learners, and they have to develop pedagogies, instructional systems that actually understand those learner needs and productively engage with them. And once again, that is not so much an issue of the size of a class than of the approach that teachers really use in learning. And once again, also, do they know their learners? That, if you actually, today I talked about, in mathematics and reading here, but we have also data on social emotional outcomes. And the number one predictor for all of this is the quality of student-teacher relationships. That if you address that, you can deal with the almost very, very large diversity.
Concur. Thank you.
Okay, Laura or Joe, do you have Jennifer or Joe, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
I do not. I have lots of notes. I have a lot of quotes that I have taken. I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation, but I don't have any additional questions at this time.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I was really struck by the comment around in some of the high-performing systems, a lot of decisions being made at the schoolhouse level, and wanted to see if you could expound upon that a little bit more in terms of, based on your research and study, what decisions are appropriate, or best served being made at the level of the schoolhouse versus what, I guess what decisions and functions should remain at at the space of the district or at the area of the state or the federal government?
Yeah, I think the answer very much depends on the capacity you have at every level. There are education systems like the Netherlands is a good example, a high-performing system, very much localized. Basically, it's a system of voucher schools. Basically, they're all operated by any providers, could be religious organizations or other. So there's almost 100% control at the school level, but they're still very closely networked. And I think that's really, the part I want to highlight. I'll give you another example from Finland. If you're a school principal in Finland, you spend 70% of your time in your school to run your school, but 30% of your time you work in the district. So the district administration is not an place where administrators decide about schools, but where school principals work together to solve their own problems or create new ones. But it's sort of in a way you have a system where actually almost full control at the school level on everything, but the people who make those decisions are the system. They're not just making their own decisions at the school, but they're very closely networked. And I think that's really the key. If you have 100% of autonomy at the school level, but a very atomized schooling structure, you probably get a lot of problems, a lot of fragmentation. If you have a kind of very cohesive school system with a lot of frontline responsibility, there's good knowledge mobilization, good pairing of expertise and high and low performing schools and so on. I think I would almost say the more frontline capacity you have is important. You can argue about curriculum. On curriculum, I would be very skeptical to localize it, and I do not know any country that has done that. I don't think even a district can develop a high quality curriculum. That is really something that you should be doing at the state level. I think the quality of the instructional system is something that requires a lot of research, a lot of expertise. So this is clearly something I would not localize. But when it comes to pedagogy, if you have a strong teaching profession that really works well together, you can give teachers a lot of professional autonomy. Professional autonomy is not about I do things the way I like to do them, but I do things in the way I know they are right in the name of my profession. So I think that would be my answer. So the investment in capacity is really the key here. And really the only reservation I have on curriculum and in exams, there you need a lot of expertise, a lot of coherence, and a lot of standardization.
Andreas, a question for me, I want to just get your comments on this. Sort of the founding premise of the blueprint, the commission's recommendations, and the blueprint bill is we're going to make this huge investment in early child development and preschool so that kids come to kindergarten ready to learn in a much greater volume than is presently the case. And then we're going to have a curriculum that is interlocking, leading to a standard at the end of the 10th grade. We have 12 grades in our schools, as you know. At the end of the 10th grade, where the vast majority of students are deemed college and career ready. That means at the end of the 10th grade, they would be ready to take a college level, entry level course without remediation. And then there'll be three pathways kids could follow. They could do advanced placement or international baccalaureate for the last 2 years. They might even take they could do early college, take some college level courses, or they could pursue a rigorous career and technical education pathway that includes apprenticeships and leads to a certification in some sophisticated trade. So that's the architecture of what we're trying to get. And I'd just be interested in your thoughts on the soundness of that architecture and how it, at least in some level, compares to other high-performing systems.
Yeah, it is actually very consistent with what you see in high-performing systems. On the preschool level, basically every high-performing systems has made preschool universal. You find very few countries like the United States where that is, very, very patchy. And I would say this is not about access. This is about, shifting from access to quality and really from care to teaching. The access question, I think you can easily resolve, but the big issue is really to ensure that the early years are considered as a crucial part of learning. In fact, many of the 21st century skills, when you talk about creativity and critical thinking, they are hard to teach later on in your life. They become personality traits. It's the early years where you can make such a difference, social emotional skills
Right.
as well. So I do think that investment in preschool, not just in places, but in shifting from care to education, from access to quality, I think is going to be incredibly important. in one way, you could not, there's no reason why, preschool teachers should be less trained or less paid than primary
Right.
or secondary teachers. Their
Yes.
work actually could be considered, when you look at the learning, as more demanding on this. So I think that is the part that is really important. And then, at the other end of the spectrum, the part I would really pay attention to is the career and technical education part. For me, that is the really missing opportunity in the United States. You oblige too many people to go to colleges that do not mean very much to them and are not the best fit for their interests. And you have made, a CET often a last resort, but not a real first choice. And I think that is the part I would really put a lot of energy in. On the AP and IB, that's pretty much standard as well. But I think the part where probably more ingenuity, more energy is required is on the CET part, because I really think you can do, for many young people, give them a much better service by giving them a high quality. Don't consider, CET as a different destination. Consider it as a different way of learning.
Right. So the commission put a lot of emphasis on that pathway, and it is captured so well in the blueprint. So, I think the U.S. is way behind the other across the country, the other high performing systems in this aspect of education. And I really, if we can do this right in Maryland with the blueprint, we're going to set a standard, I think, for the rest of the country. Unfortunately, we've got some more work to do today before our meeting ends, Andreas. So we're going to have to bring this portion to an end. But I know I speak for my colleagues. We cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today and to offer these very, very thoughtful and helpful comments. My hope is that, so we're in this big experiment in Maryland, trying to do the kinds of things you've been doing research on over the years. And we hope maybe we can bring you back from time to time, and you can give us a thoughts on where we are, and maybe offer some good advice to us.
With pleasure. Count on me.
Okay. Well, thank you again. You've just been terrific, and we are deeply appreciative.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow. Well, colleagues, I think that was a really worthwhile discussion. And Rachel, I know Ike will want to see it. Laura, so it's taped, so they can watch it, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
we're also going to be getting the copy of his PowerPoint.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd like to study that.
We'll share those, and we'll
Something
also
like that,
post
yeah.
those on the General Assembly website.
Yeah. Well, colleagues, we want this is sort of the kickoff, and we're gearing up now to do these deep dives and really roll up our sleeves in some and get to the hard work of developing this implementation plan. And so, Rachel, maybe I'll turn to you now to sort of give us a bit of an overview of what will be happening over the next several months.
Sure. So we're going to share the screen and just show you the document. But so generally, the idea is to hold a series of meetings that delve deeper into each of the 5 pillars of the blueprint, and to move this, so I'm looking at the camera here, so that we can develop a common understanding of the blueprint law and the requirements, and also sort of why the policies and the law were designed the way they were. With Andreas Schleicher helped with a lot of that, and also an understanding of what specifically is required by the law, what the timelines are, what the milestones are and should be if they aren't specified. So for each of the next 3 meetings, we're going to have 3 meetings in June, and those are going to be on June 6th. They're going to be on Thursday afternoons. June 16 23, and 30. And you can see on the screen there, we're going to tackle pillars 3 and 5 first, and then pillars 1 and 4, and then finally pillar 2. And at each of these meetings, we're going to invite an international or national expert to help provide the sort of the why or the context of what top systems are doing, both around the world and in the US, and help explain, where the policies in the blueprint come from, and then in most cases have a former commission member who was part of developing those policies provide some additional context around where the law came from and what was intended. And then we'll spend time going through the specific requirements of the law and the timelines. And as part of that, the board, of course, the meetings will all be live streamed. The board members will be participating, and we will also have a limited number of other stakeholders participating as part of those meetings, so that there can be some interaction there. And then following the June meetings, for the rest of the summer, there will be what we're calling working group sessions by pillar that will come back and I was going to say smaller groups, but actually it might be larger groups where we have more stakeholders participating and interacting with the board members and each other to really delve into any additional information that was requested, issues that and questions about what is required and the implementation, and really to try to identify if there are any challenges that rise to the level where the AIB may want to consider recommending a statutory change. And then also laying the groundwork for developing what the actual draft comprehensive plan is going to look like. So that is what we will spend the summer doing. Pretty much most Thursdays in July and August will be taken up with that work. And we will be announcing the schedule for that in June. We're not quite there yet. And those meetings will also be public, as I said, with other stakeholders participating in that. And then all of that will culminate in a draft comprehensive plan that the AIB will adopt and publish by the middle of October. And then in November, the AIB is going to hold a public hearing to get broader public feedback on the draft plan and make whatever revisions are necessary and appropriate so that we can meet the December 1 deadline for publishing the final comprehensive implementation plan for the blueprint. So it's going to be a busy summer.
It is indeed.
But hopefully very productive and constructive.
Well, and this is really going to be so critical to a successful implementation. Rachel, thank you for that. And we have just a couple of more minutes left in the meeting. And, we've talked a lot and are totally committed to, you mentioned stakeholders, Rachel, to having a formal advisory structure that would bring individuals from across the state into our conversations and have a chance to interact with us and to give us advice. And Joe, you've done a lot of thinking on this and have shared some ideas with us and working with a number of us and to get this organized. And I'd like, if you could just take a few minutes to say where we are with the advisory committee structure effort.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dr. Kerwin. So we are, at this point, we're poised to launch our advisory committees. This is something that was called upon by the Senate President and the Governor to try to get a broader representation across the state and get a broader representation of various perspectives. So we have gone through and created what amounts to 4 advisory committees, each representing the content areas of the blueprint. You can see the document here outlines the purpose of the advisory committees. There's information just on a summary of what the kind of task of each of the advisory committees are, which is to be content experts and key stakeholders that have deep interest in one of the 4 areas of the blueprint that will serve in an advisory team of 5. Our hope is that the advisory team will meet at least quarterly to go through and either provide input on items that the AIB is discussing, provide insights from the field, give reflections on conversations that are occurring either in the meetings or the work groups, and to give a broader, more robust perspective on each of these elements as we go through and help to develop the comprehensive implementation plan. There's a structure for nominations. So if you are not interested in being on one of the advisory committees, but you know of somebody who you think would be exceptional, whether they be, and we're looking for all manner of stakeholders. So in particular, we're looking for outstanding students that are very interested in one of these 4 bodies of work, excellent teachers, school administrators, district staff, people who have expertise within the field, childcare providers, anybody who has deep knowledge, expertise, passion, and interest in one of the 4 content areas of the blueprint. We welcome you to apply. And if you know of somebody who is who you think would be interested in this, please recommend them as a nomination. We are asking that nominations be submitted by Monday, June 6th. You can go through an email, aib@maryland.gov, just with the name and the email address of who you are nominating. And then that way we can send an application link to the nominee. The actual applications will be required to be submitted by Monday, June 20th. So the information, including this document, is posted on the Maryland General Assembly website. The application is just a short collection of basic demographic information, name, address, email address, phone number. And then we're also asking each applicant to submit a resume and a short personal statement explaining why they are interested in serving on one of the advisory committees, and also a place in which you can select which of the advisory committees you are interested in participating in. Just as a reminder, the 4 content pillars that will be the basis of the advisory committees will be, we're looking for an advisory committee of 5 members that is focused on early childhood education, 1 on high quality and diverse teachers and leaders, a 3rd advisory committee that is focused on college and career readiness pathways, and then a 4th advisory committee that is looking exclusively at more resources to ensure all students are successful. And then finally, we are going to have a brief information session, question and answer session on Thursday, June 2nd at noon. If you are interested in joining one of the advisory committees, but you want some more information, or you have some questions that you want to surface, and we would welcome any and all to participate in the information session. We're really hoping to get a broad range of individuals who are really passionate and interested in education across the state. And having a diverse group of advisory committee members is critically important for our board. We encourage anybody who is interested in this to apply. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything, either Britt or Rachel.
Very good, Joe. Well done.
Yeah, thanks.
Rachel, we're going to have other means of getting this word out. I think we're going to send emails out to the districts, get a real communication message out to, so we hope to get a large number of people interested in this activity.
Yes, we are going to email this information to far and wide. Also we will be sharing, we do have a Twitter account now, and I'm just going to ask if you can scroll down. So there you go. So anyone who is interested in following us on Twitter, the information, the application link will be posted there as well as on the General Assembly's website, and the information on how to join the information session, we will email that out, and we will also post it on Twitter.
Good, great. Okay, colleagues, we've actually exceeded our time slightly, but let me see if anybody has any comment to add before we wrap up for today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Joe. This is really great. And I'm excited about all of this. Quick question. Students, is there any age requirement to be a student on the committee?
It's a good question.
I think when we had talked about it, we were really looking for students that were above age 16, but I don't know if that's where we actually settled, Rachel, but
I think it is. I think we were looking at high school students, particularly above age at least 16.
Yeah, I mean, they would have at least had the much of the full experience of education. If they were high school students, they would have been elementary, maybe even preschool, et cetera. So that, I think that, Mara, is why they were focusing on 16 and above.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Jennifer, anything from your front?
I don't think so. I think I just want to close out that when we had our presenter start this morning, a quote that I wrote down was, "Poverty is not destiny." And I think that is something that really resonates with me, that I know is part of the work that we're doing. So I just appreciate that opportunity to hear from such experts.
Great. Okay, colleagues, the next meeting, Rachel, is?
So session 2 will be Thursday, June 16th, starting at 1:30 p.m. and we'll be focusing on pillar 3, which is college and career readiness, and then pillar 5, which is governance and accountability.
Great. Okay, to my fellow board members, stay cool this weekend. It's not going to be easy, but thank you for your participation today, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kerwin.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks.